Hey guys, Hackersploit here, back again with another video. Welcome to the Red Team training series. This is going to be an introductory guide to Red Team operations, and we've partnered with Linode to bring you this series. So again, I'm just going to give you a bit of a introduction to the series and what we'll be covering. Alright, so starting off with part 1, we're going to start off by taking a look at adversary emulation with Caldera, which is exactly what we're going to be exploring in this particular video. We'll then take a look at reconnaissance techniques, exploitation techniques. We'll then take a look at how to dump credentials with Mimikatz, and then setting up persistence with Empire. So we'll take a look at how to use Empire to set up a C2 server, etc., and also various persistence techniques for all your agents. Part 2 will consist of advanced techniques, so we'll be talking about defense evasion, so antivirus evasion, etc., obfuscation, all of that good stuff, and then we'll move on to actually taking a look at how to hide Linux processes, Linux rootkits, and then we'll move on to privilege escalation techniques on both Windows and Linux, but we'll be exploring them, quite equally in that respect. And then finally, we'll end this series by taking a look at lateral movement on Windows with PSXX. So again, this is meant to be an introductory red teaming course or red teaming series that is set to introduce you to various red teaming techniques that are used whenever you want to perform a red team operation, right? Now that we have an understanding of what we'll be covering in this series, let's again get a clear picture of what the prerequisites are. So again, given the fact that we're focused on red teaming, we're going to be dealing with various operating systems, mostly Windows and Linux. So you need to be familiar with both these operating systems in the sense that you know how to use them, you know how to actually navigate, navigate around on these systems, interact with the systems, so on and so forth. You'll also need a functional knowledge of TCP/IP because again, there's going to be a few aspects of networking here. You're also going to have a familiarity with penetration testing. So if you're if you're a beginner to InfoSec or cybersecurity, I recommend checking out our penetration testing bootcamp, as it will cover various penetration testing concepts and techniques. And then finally, you're going to need familiarity with HTTP and web technology. So you need to have an understanding of HTTP, how that works, how to intercept requests, what an HTTP request comprises of. And you then need to be, when I reference web technologies, I'm simply referencing various stacks like the LAMP stack. You should be familiar with PHP, etc. This is all just setting up a baseline so that when you actually get started with the techniques, there is not really a very steep slope when it comes down to learning. Right, so let's get started with today's video, which is adversary emulation with Caldera. So again, if you're not familiar with red teaming, I'm guessing you're not familiar with adversary emulation and therefore Caldera as a open source tool, and that's what this video is actually seeking to remedy. So firstly, what will we be covering in this video, in this particular video? So we'll get started by taking a look at what red teaming is. We'll then move on, to take a look at the differences between red teaming and penetration testing. We'll then get an idea of what adversary emulation is in the context of red teaming. We'll then move on to take a look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And finally, we'll get to the practical aspect of this video, which takes you through the process of performing adversary emulation with Caldera. All right, so what is red teaming, right? Because this is a question that a lot of people may have, but really don't understand the answer. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they interpolate pen testing and red teaming with one another. And of course, that is true to some extent, but there are a few key differences that differentiate them in regards to how attackers or specialists perform them, what they're looking for, the techniques they use, and what they're actually seeking to get out of the operation. Right, so a red team operation is a full scope simulated attack designed to test the security of a company's digital infrastructure, employees, applications, and physical security by simulating or emulating attacks and techniques used by real adversaries, right? So the key thing to note here is instead, we'll actually take a look at this when we'll be exploring the differences, is with the red team, we're actually, using the entire scope. So we're not limited to a particular scope or a particular subnet. Secondly, we're also testing employees, so there's social engineering, etc. And we're also using techniques that are used by real adversaries, right? So those are the three key differentiating factors. Now, red team operations are used by companies primarily to measure how well they can withstand an attack from a real adversary. So you can tell from that statement how important red team operations are for large companies, or even medium to smaller size companies, because they have also been facing quite a few attacks from certain APTs or from certain adversaries. Red team operations can reveal multiple attack vectors or vulnerabilities that may not be found by performing a penetration test. So in that sense, they're very comprehensive because, number one, it's a full scope, simulated attack, and secondly, you're targeting various aspects of the company's infrastructure, both physical and digital. All right, moving on to the next point, which is very important. So red team operations replicate the techniques used by real adversaries over a full attack lifecycle and provides actionable results to the company. So when it comes down to a red team operation, again, we're primarily going to perform an operation based on the techniques used by a certain adversary. It doesn't have to be that way, but it's typically recommended to do that because you're testing, the company's ability to withstand these attacks. And of course, the key objective here, or the key objective of a red team operation, is to, of course, after the operation, provide these results to the company, so that the company can then use these results to actually assist them in detecting these attacks in the future, right? And it also is used for various other things, which I'll talk about in a second. So the results, as I said, are used by the company's blue team or the security team to write signatures for specific malware or payloads in order to improve their detection of the various pieces of malware that this particular adversary utilizes in its attack kill chain or life cycle. It's also used to implement security safeguards, harden their infrastructure, patch vulnerabilities, and provide employees with training to prevent social engineering attacks. So you can see it covers the entire gamut of attacks here in regards to the results and how the company can use these results to improve their security and detection in all aspects, from physical to digital. And of course, to conclude this particular slide, red team operations can also be used to emulate the techniques used by APT attacks or advanced persistent threats. And of course, I mentioned that earlier. We'll take a look at this in a few minutes when we get to the practical aspect. All right, so now that we have an understanding of what red teaming is, let's take a look at the differences between red teaming and pen testing. All right, so when we're talking about a pen test, you're typically, as I said earlier, going to be dealing with a defined scope. So again, the company is going to hire you to attack their network, and that could comprise of specific subnets. And of course, the company could exclude specific or other subnets that they don't want you to test. They could also limit you to a web application. So, you can't go ahead and target the infrastructure. You can only target the web application. Secondly, and this is very important, the objective of a pen test is to identify and exploit vulnerabilities. You really aren't required to go further than that because, as I said, when we're talking about an adversary in the context of an advanced persistent threat, their kill chain or life cycle is much longer than a pen test, in the sense that when an attacker breaches a company or obtains an initial foothold on the target network, the objective is then to elevate privileges. Once they've elevated privileges, they then try and move their way up, or navigate around the network and exfiltrate or damage data. So there's additional steps that are also can be emulated or simulated in a red team, right? So with a pen test, you're simply supposed to identify and exploit vulnerabilities and then provide a report to the company with your findings, right? Now, the company can use these results in a preventative way. as opposed to a detective way, in the sense that once they know what can be exploited, they just patch it and that's it. And of course, the key aspect that they're missing here is that this really did not involve any techniques that are used by real attackers, and as a result, you don't get a comprehensive idea of other vulnerabilities that may exist, right? So this is where red team operations come into play. So, as I mentioned, red team operations are used to emulate adversary behavior. And when I talk about behavior, what I'm referring to is the entire life cycle, the attack life cycle of the adversary. So, from reconnaissance to initial access to lateral movement, so on and so forth. And of course, this red team operations are used to assess the resilience of an organization or a company against a particular adversary attack, right? So you're trying to determine whether your company can withstand an attack from a particular APT group, for example, right? And you do that by using the same techniques that they use, and that gives you a clear a quite accurate answer as to whether or not your company can withstand these attacks. Right. And finally, in terms of the results that are provided to the company from a red team operation, the results are very actionable and can be used, in two ways, both preventative in the context of patching systems, hardening servers, etc. And also it's provided. It's also provided for detection and prevention. So again, typically the company's blue team or the security team will be responsible for using the data to then generate signatures or generate detection mechanisms based on whatever systems they're using to detect and then prevent these attacks in real time, right? So that's where the whole red team versus blue team aspect comes into play. And in a gamified sense, as we'll actually take a look at with Caldera, you can actually see how this works when we emulate a particular red team operation, and then have the blue team detect and of course prevent these attacks, and you can see who actually is winning. So we'll actually get to that in a few minutes. Right. So I've thrown out the term adversary emulation quite a bit now. So it's time to get an understanding of what adversary emulation is. Adversary emulation is the process of emulating the tactics, techniques, and the behavior of a specific adversary. Now, the objective of adversary emulation is to assess and improve how the resilience, rather, of an organization against specific adversary techniques or attacks. Now, that's a very key element there. And when we talk about a particular adversary, it doesn't have to be a well-known APT team or APT group for that matter. It could simply be an adversary that you have identified and you want to actually monitor and classify in regards to what they do and how they do it. So adversary behavior is classified using tactics, techniques, and procedures, also known as TTPs, right? So adversary TTPs are used to outline how a specific adversary operates. And when I say outline, I mean, describe each step of their methodology or kill chain, and all the techniques that are used within each of those stages, right? Now, when it comes down to adversary emulation or a successful adversary emulation, you really should base your adversary emulations on adversary TTPs in order to again facilitate an accurate adversary attack or to obtain accurate results. So again, if you use an adversary emulation exercise and only perform or utilize techniques that you would typically use in a penetration test, then you're not getting an accurate picture of the company's security status or their ability to deal with certain attacks. So again, make sure that you follow a structured methodology, as I mentioned right at the bottom here. Now, when it comes down to the red team kill chain, this is the typical methodology that you'll see. Right, so you have initial reconnaissance to gather as much information as possible. And remember, this is full scope. So you're gathering all types of information, both physical and digital. So physical in the sense that you're performing all the various techniques associated with physical reconnaissance. So, you're visiting the premises, you may be stalking employees, or, paying close attention to them, what they do, what devices they access. And then, of course, in the context of digital reconnaissance, or passive reconnaissance online, you're finding domains, subnets, technology used by the company, web applications, emails, employee emails, so on and so forth. And then from that information, you then stage your initial attack, right? And your initial attack, typically in a red team, will really not involve, obtaining access by exploiting a system, because, you're going to be, or we are running under the assumption that the systems are quite secure, but it's not entirely uncommon to find that. But you'll typically see that red team operations, or, the initial stages of the process of actually compromising a company involves, phishing attacks or phishing campaigns against the employees. And then once you establish a foothold, your job then is to elevate your privileges, and then perform internal reconnaissance, move laterally, maintain a presence. So that's persistence. And then you complete the mission, right? And that's pretty much it. And then you submit these results to the company in question. Now, as I said, this is the typical kill chain. Let's take a look at what the MITRE ATT&CK framework is, right? So the MITRE ATT&CK framework, as it says here, is a globally accessible knowledge base of adversary tactics and techniques based on real-world observations or data that has been gathered from adversaries online. The attack knowledge base is used as a foundation for the development of specific threat models and methodologies in the private sector, in government, and in the cybersecurity product and service community. Right, so again, this may be a little bit confusing if this is your first time hearing about the MITRE ATT&CK framework. But again, I'm just going to break it down and help you understand what it is. Right, so the MITRE ATT&CK framework, again, in the context of a red team operation, provides us with a structured kill chain or methodology that we can utilize for our adversary emulation. And is typically used by red teaming or by red teamers, or in red team operations, to provide you with, the various tactics and techniques used by a particular adversary, or a structured methodological approach to performing a red team operation. And again, I'll explain this in a second here when we take a look at this slide here. So if you visit the website linked here, which is just attack@mitre.org, you're going to have the actual framework laid out for you, and it's going to be sorted out into two primary categories. You're going to have your technique, you're going to have your tactics and your techniques, as you can see here. So yeah, your tactics follow the typical methodology utilized within the red team kill chain, which you can see here: reconnaissance, initial access, or initial exploitation, establishing a foothold, elevating privileges, etc., etc. And you can see that replicated here, where you have reconnaissance, resource development, initial access, execution, persistence, and there are many others that I haven't actually outlined here, primarily because I just wanted to explain the two categories here. So these are known as tactics. So tactics categorize each step of the adversary's attack methodology, and techniques are used to outline how each tactic is executed. So for example, if we take a look at the reconnaissance tactic, we can see that it includes 10 techniques, and the techniques include active scanning, gathering victim host information, gathering the victim network information, and these are all techniques. So if you click on the technique, it'll actually give you information as to how that technique is executed or it's performed. Examples of how this is performed, reference links, and also the various APT groups that actually use this particular technique. So it's extremely helpful framework when it comes to red teaming, and of course in this context, adversary emulation, right? All right, so now that you have an understanding of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, let's take a look at Caldera. So what is MITRE Caldera? Because Caldera, the framework, is designed by MITRE as well, which is excellent. So Caldera is a cybersecurity framework that is designed to easily automate adversary emulation, assist manual red teams, and automate incident response, right? It's built on the MITRE ATT&CK framework and utilizes a client-server system where the server is used to set up agents, which are also known as clients, as I've just mentioned, and initiate operations or various scenarios. So it's important to note that the framework consists of two core components. Number one, the core system, which is the framework code consisting of what is available on the GitHub repository. And included is an asynchronous command and control server, or C2 server, with the REST API and web interface. So this is going to be the server. And again, it provides us with a web interface that we will be utilizing. And secondly, you have plugins, right? So plugins are essentially repositories that expand the core framework capabilities and provide additional functionality. Examples of this will include agents, reporting, collection of TTPs, and more. All right, so we will take a look at this because right now it seems a bit arbitrary and you really don't understand what's going on, but it'll actually make sense when we get started with the practical segment. Before we do that, there's a bit of terminology that you need to understand or get a grip on in regards to Caldera. Number one is an ability, right? So in the context of Caldera, an ability is used to outline a set of actions that are used to achieve a specific goal. It's fairly simple to understand. For example, if we say, we can create an ability that is supposed to enumerate system information on Linux targets, that can be an ability. In the context of an adversary, this is a malicious actor that is paired with specific abilities. So again, this is going to be an emulated adversary, which is what we're doing. We're not actually going to hack the systems ourselves. We're using Caldera to automate the process. But there are various manual things that we can do, and we'll touch upon that. So an adversary is simply an actor, a malicious actor, that's going to, again, run a particular, it's going to perform an action. And of course, it performs an action based on the abilities that it's been paired with. An agent is essentially the target host system. So again, if you, for example, if you want to perform an adversary emulation on your Windows workstations, then you'll need to install, you'll need to set up these systems as agents, and they'll ping back to the C2 server, the Caldera C2 server, and then you can launch attacks against them or run various operations against them. And finally, groups. Groups are essentially just a collection of agents, either based on the operating system or function. So if you're running a huge, or if you want to run a huge operation on a large amount of agents or target systems, you're going to be dealing with multiple operating systems and systems that actually serve various functions, and groups can be used to categorize them so that you can easily differentiate between systems and run operations on these particular groups instead of specific agents, and that gives you the ability to have granular control over your operations and the agents that you want to target. That being said, this should pretty much cover the theoretical aspect of this video. Let's take a look at how to set up Caldera. But before that, I want to touch upon the MITRE ATT&CK framework and how that works, and then we'll move on to setting up Caldera, and we'll then take a look at various scenarios that we can perform just to show you how Caldera works. All right, so let's get started with the practical aspect. All right, welcome back to the practical section of this video. As I said, let's start off by taking a look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework and how it's sorted out. This will give you an understanding of what I was describing in the slides, as that may have been slightly arbitrary. But you can see that you have the attack matrix, which essentially gives you it essentially sorts out the tactics and techniques, typically utilized in red team operations, and also by specific APT groups or adversaries, right? And in this particular context, this doesn't make sense, but I'll get to each of these sections in a second. So, for example, if I wanted to view techniques used in the reconnaissance stage, we can click on reconnaissance here, and you can see it's going to provide you with information regarding this particular tactic. And then it's going to provide you the techniques for this particular tactic. So reconnaissance consists of techniques that involve adversaries actively or passively gathering information that can be used to support targeting. And it gives you a very good description there. Now, if I take a look at the techniques that are used, for example, let's see, email addresses. This is under gather victim identity information. So email harvesting, as it were, but in this case, let's click on it here. And you can see that this is the technique, gather victim identify information, email addresses. Adversaries may gather email addresses that can be used during targeting. Even if internal instances exist, organizations may have public-facing email infrastructure and addresses for employees, right? So adversaries may easily gather email addresses since they may be readily available and exposed via online or other accessible datasets, for example, social media or victim-owned websites. And again, there are various tools that can be used. But again, this describes the techniques that are used by adversaries in the context of reconnaissance as the tactic, and the technique in this case is email harvesting. Now, the key thing here, and this is why it's so helpful, is you can take a look at the various examples, and these are the APT groups or the hacking or adversary groups that utilize this particular technique. For example, the APT32 group, which again, it provides you a description, has collected email addresses for activists and bloggers in order to target them with spyware. So if we click on APT32, we can get a description of this particular APT group, and it tells us it has been active since at least 2014 and has targeted multiple private sector industries, as well as with foreign governments, dissidents, and journalists, with a strong focus on Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, Philippines, and Laos, and Cambodia. And then it provides you with the various descriptions for this particular group and the other techniques that they utilize, right? So for example, in terms of the techniques here, we can actually look for some interesting ones here. For example, like there we are, command and scripting interpreter. Again, as you can see, it provides you with the description or the use case. So APT32 has used scriptlets to download Cobalt Strike beacons. So again, you get an understanding of the tooling that they're utilizing. So we can see that they're using Cobalt Strike as their C2 server. And then they also utilize PowerShell, Visual Basic, and JavaScript. For example, in the context of JavaScript for drive-by downloads and C2 communication. So you can use all of these techniques to simulate or emulate operations or attacks by the APT32 group, even with Caldera, right? And this is the great thing about the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So I recommend checking it out. As I said, the website is sorted, based on enterprise and mobile environments. So for example, if we click on mobile, you can see you have your tactics, which are sorted out here, and the various techniques that are used within each of those tactics. And then, of course, you have mitigations, which I haven't covered. So if we take a step back here and we're talking about email addresses, you can see that mitigations here, in this case, should be done pre-compromise, right? So the technique cannot be easily mitigated with preventative control, since it is based on behaviors performed outside the scope of enterprise defenses and controls. So again, that makes a lot of sense. And then you have various references. So I just wanted to introduce you to the framework this way. And as I said, it's something that you should explore yourself. Go ahead and check out all the various techniques used in each of these tactics. For example, privilege escalation, access token manipulation as the technique here. It gives you an understanding of that there. And then the various groups or the procedure examples here, and the mitigation, the various mitigations that can be performed, right? So again, check that out. So now that you have an understanding of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, let's move on to Caldera and how to set it up and how to use it. All right, so let's take a look at how to set up Caldera, right? Now, before we do that, I just want to explain a few things in regards to the infrastructure that I'll be using. So for my Caldera server, I'll be installing it or setting it up on a Linode server, which is running Ubuntu 20.04. And again, you can use this, in a typical C2 fashion, where you have a server where you orchestrate or initiate all your attacks from. And alternatively, if you don't want to do that, you can also use your Kali VM to host or to to actually set up the Caldera server. But again, we are going to be providing you with free Linode credit, so you can get $100 of free credit on Linode. You can access that in the description section, and you can then set up your server. So again, to access the Caldera GitHub repository, just click on the link in the description, or you can simply search for Caldera Red Team. And this is the GitHub repository here, and it's fairly simple. It gives you, an introduction as to how to use it, as well as documentation, and it then gives you the explanation of how it's sorted out. So we are starting off by taking a look at how to set up the core system first, right? And it also explains the various plugins that are actually used and what they are used to do. And as I mentioned in the slides, plugins are used to extend the functionality of the core system or the core framework, right? And as for the requirements of on your server or on your Kali VM, you need to be running Linux, of course, or Mac OS. You also need Python 3 installed with pip 3. You need to have Google Chrome. That's the officially supported browser. In my case, I'll be using Firefox because it works for me. So again, I recommend following the instructions here. And as for the recommended hardware, you need to have at least 8 gigs of RAM and 2 CPUs. That's the recommended resource allocation that you should have, based on the type of operations you're going to be running. Now, in my case, I'm going to be having 2 target systems that I'm going to be performing or running operations on, or that I'm going to be, performing my adversary emulation operations on. And in this case, I have a Linux server, which is also running on Linode. It's Ubuntu 16.04. That's going to be my first target. And my second target, or my second agent, if you will, is going to be a Windows Server 2008 virtual machine that I've set up. And I'll take you through the process of adding them as agents and, essentially getting them to connect back to our C2 server, right? Which is a huge part of the process. The installation process is fairly simple. You need to clone the Caldera repository, and it provides you with instructions here. You need to make sure it's a recursive clone, and you're cloning the branch 3.1.0, which I believe is stable. So again, I'll head over into my terminal, and you can see I'm going to be using tmux to differentiate what system I'm working on. So I'm currently logged on to my Caldera server, and that is denoted by the asterisk here. I also have my Caldera Agent 1 server, which again is the Ubuntu 16.04 server. We'll take a look at that when we get there. So again, the first thing that you want to do, as it says here, is you want to clone the repository. So you can clone it into any directory you want. I'm just doing it within the home directory of the root user. So I'll paste in the commands there. It's going to clone it. Based on your internet connection or your internet speed, it's going to take a few seconds to a few minutes. In my case, I'm running this on Linode, so it should actually complete it under 30 seconds. So I'm just going to let that complete. All right, so that has cloned the repository. The next thing you want to do is you need to navigate into the directory and install the dependencies and requirements with pip3. So you want to copy that command there. So we'll head over into Caldera. And we then want to, again, just run the command there. It's going to install the dependencies. In my case, I already have installed them. So it's going to tell me that the requirements have been satisfied. In your case, it's going to install the requirements. I think I actually pasted that in incorrectly. Well, I actually did paste that in correctly. So again, just make sure you do that. The next step, of course, is to start up the server. And again, it says right away, you can superpower your Caldera server installation by installing Golang, which I recommend doing, but it's not a requirement. It's just going to speed up your server. And then you can start the server by running Python 3 and the server Python script with the insecure flag. What insecure means is that there isn't going to be an SSL certificate when you access it either on localhost or on the server address, right, through the web interface. So we're going to start up the server. Before we do that, I just want to take you through the Caldera configuration file, which is again used to configure Caldera, and that can be found under the conf folder. And you can, again, I'll just use vim. So we'll say app, and the default configuration is stored in a file called, that is under conf. And the default configuration file is called default.yaml. So it's a YAML configuration file, and let's hit enter. And within this instance here, you can then configure various options based on your based on your Caldera server and various details that you would like set up. So for example, number one, let's the ability refresh. We'll not take a look at that right now, but again, that simply means whenever you're running an operation or whenever an adversary is running a particular ability, the actual refresh period, which is in seconds. You then have the app contact DNS domain. That's if you've set up your server or you've set up a domain for the server IP address. You also have your app contact HTML, which we don't need to change right now. We'll get to that in a second. You can also enable or disable plugins right over here. So you just need to comment out a plugin. I recommend leaving it as is, as the default configuration is fine. You can also change the default port for the web interface from 8888 to anything else that you're comfortable with. You also can change the directory under which the reports generated by Caldera will be stored. And then of course you have the requirements here, and then you have your authentication or your credentials for the user. So Caldera, as I mentioned in the slides, can be used for red and blue team emulation, in the sense that you can set up a red team agent to run to actually perform a particular operation that is offensive in nature. And you can also set up a blue team agent on the same system or on another system to actually detect and prevent these attacks, right? So for the red team aspect, the credentials for the red team account is red and the password is admin. In this case, we're not changing anything, so I'm just going to quit without making any changes, and we just want to paste in the server command here. So you want to give that a few seconds to start up. If it gives you a warning, like for example, the insecure flag is set, that simply means that Caldera will use the default YAML configuration file. If you want to learn more about editing the configuration, you can take a look at their documentation. It covers this extensively. And then it's going to then load the plugins. It's going to tell you that Go doesn't meet the minimum version if you haven't installed Go, which is fine in my case. And then of course, if it gives you a dependency warning like UPX doesn't meet the minimum version, again, it tells you that this is an optional dependency and its absence will not affect Caldera's core operation, that means that's fine. And in this case, you can see it says all systems ready, and that pretty much means we can access the Caldera server through the IP address of the server. And of course, in my case, I've set it up on Linode, so I'm just gonna fire that up here, or I'm just gonna copy the IP, and all I need to do to access it is head over into Firefox and paste the IP there and the port 8888, hit enter. And that's going to take me to the login page. So to access the red team side of things, we type in the user as red, and we then type in the user as admin, and that's going to log us in. And welcome to Caldera, right? So again, the interface is fairly simple to understand once you actually start using it. You have a sidebar on your left here, which is collapsed by default, so you can click on the hamburger icon to actually expand it, and it actually categorizes functionality right over here into various categories. So you have your campaigns. This is where you set up your agents, your adversaries, your operations, and then you have your plugins. So you can modify options pertaining to these particular plugins. And then you have your advanced options here, which we'll get to once we get there, because right now, if we take a look at this at this point, there's going to be quite a bit of a conflict here. And then you have your administrative section, which simply shows you startup errors, and you can log out, right? Now that we have that set up, let's get started with the first thing that we need to do is we need to add our target systems or our hosts as agents, right? And to do that, we click on agents. And right over here under agents, it's going to say you must deploy at least one agent in order to run an operation. Groups are collections of agents, so hosts can be compromised simultaneously. I already covered that in the slides, right? Now for the agents, you can configure the options. So you have your beacon timers, and of course, if I get rid of 30 here, you can see the minimum amount of seconds for the beacon. You can modify that based on the based on whether or not you want your operations to be run stealthily. And if you want them to be much more aggressive, which again can actually cause or trip alarms on the blue team, you can modify that. I'm just going to leave it as 30 as the minimum and 60 seconds as the maximum. You have your watchdog timer, which is set to 0 seconds. Your untrusted timer for your untrusted agents, which is set to 90 seconds. Your implant name, this is very important. Your implant name is going to be the name of the process and the binary that's going to be executed on the target system. That'll again, is essentially a reverse shell. This is the name of the process and the binary. And again, it's important that you provide a name that is as clandestine as possible, so that the blue team or administrators can't detect that process running, because again, you've provided it with a name that's not really easily detectable. So in this case, we'll just call it Caldera so that we can identify it. I'll not talk about bootstrap abilities and deadman abilities right now. I'll get to that in a few seconds. But we can save the changes now. These are going to be the changes for our agents, and I'll just collapse these options or these configuration menus. Right, so to actually deploy an agent, we can click on deploy an agent. We then choose an agent. So an agent, as essentially, as I said, is a reverse shell, and there are multiple plugins that have been set up for you. I typically like using Sandcat, which is a Golang agent, which communicates through the HTTP contact point, which is going to be your HTTP server address. And you also have Manx, which is a reverse shell agent, which communicates via TCP, which is also great. You can also, again, modify and utilize UDP if that interests you. Let's take a look at how to set up our agent with Sandcat. So the agent we're going to be setting up first is going to be our Ubuntu 16.04 server, which again, in your case, you can run this on your Windows VMs, your Linux VMs, etc. In my case, I'm just going to use a simple Ubuntu 16.04 server. So I'm just switched onto the Caldera agent. You can see it here. So I'll just display the distribution information here. So cat etc release. You can see it's Ubuntu 16.04, right? And now what we need to do is we need to actually generate we need to actually generate the payload script here. So we specify the platform of our target system. Darwin is in reference to macOS, so that's the architecture there. And then you have Linux or Windows. In our case, the target system we're adding right now is Linux. We then provide the Caldera server IP address and a port. So HTTP, the IP address and the port 8888. And then the implant name, which we set as Caldera. If you can't see because the text has been blurred out, I apologize for that. But again, you can also type in an implant name for this agent if you want. And then at the bottom here, it's going to generate the scripts for you that you need to run on the target system in order to actually get the agent or the target to connect back. So for example, this is the we're using a Sandcat. So this is a Golang agent which communicates through the HTTP contact via bash. So this needs to be run with bash. And you can see it sets the server variable as the Caldera server and the port there, the respective port. It then gets Sandcat, it then gets the agent there and downloads it from the Caldera server. And then again, it executes or it provides the actual binary or the agent with executable permissions and runs it in the background. Now, if you're running or setting up a blue team agent, you can then copy the blue team code here or the script there. If you want to run the agent under a random name and start it as a background process, you can do that as well here. Although, as I said, you want to avoid random names as much as possible. But we can do that. We can copy that. That also is very, very useful. So we will use this here. What that's going to do is going to start up the agent on the target system under a random name in the background, right? So we can copy that. We now want to paste this script or this code on our target system. In this case, you can see Caldera agent 1. So we'll paste it there. We then want to hit enter. And it's going to run that in the background. And it provides us with the process ID there. and the agent should have connected back. We can actually see it's connected back there. So if we close this up, we can see our target. We now have a beacon or a connection back from the target, and we have it provides us with information. So for example, the ID here, which we can change. You also have the name of the host, which in this case is localhost, the contact method or protocol, in this case HTTP, the process ID of the actual process, and let's see if it actually reflects accurately. You can see it reflects 12352. That is correct. And the privileges we have are elevated because I ran it as the root user. Right? So if we click on the PID here, we can see it provides us with information as to when this agent was created, when it was last seen. We can also change the group. So for example, we can add a group here, or we can add this agent to the group Linux, right? And then the sleep duration, so minimum 30 seconds, maximum 60 seconds. We can also modify that based on your own parameters. It also gives you information regarding the architecture, the platform, the process ID, the executable name, which in this case we set to Caldera, and then the executors, which in this case was just the Bourne shell. And yeah, we can also kill the agent or save any configurations we have made here. So I can hit save. That's going to save it there. And that is how to deploy an agent. And of course, we can now interact or run operations against this target. So this is our Linux target or our Linux agent. Let's take a look at how to deploy this on a Windows system. So again, the first thing we're going to do is just click on deploy an agent. We'll also use, we can actually use Manx. Let's switch it up a little bit. Our target system is Windows. Again, I'll just copy the Caldera server address here. And now for the app-contact.tcp, you simply want to provide the Caldera server IP address and the port 7010 for TCP connections. So again, hopefully you can see what I'm typing in here. And again, you just want to do this for UDP as well. And the port in this case is 7011. Right? And you can see it generates the PowerShell code for you that you need to execute on the target. So you have TCP and UDP. So you want to copy the PowerShell code and paste it onto the target system. And again, once that's done, it should connect back and we should be able to then run operations against that particular agent. So I'm going to switch on. I'm going to switch onto my Windows target system. So just give me a few seconds as I switch onto the Windows target system. All right, so I'm back on my Windows target system and I've copied the PowerShell code. And what you need to do now is you can execute or run the code from an unprivileged user account or a privileged user account based on the types of operations you want to run. So for example, if you're trying to identify, for example, what you can do on an unprivileged system, you can then deploy the agent from an unprivileged account, as I'm going to do. So again, give PowerShell a few seconds to start up here. And I'm just going to paste in the PowerShell code. Again, let me make sure I've copied it. All right, so I've copied and pasted it here. And I'm just going to hit enter now. And let's give that a few seconds. That should actually execute it. There we are. And just give it a few seconds. And if we switch back to the Caldera server web UI, we should see that it's pinged back. So that's what I'm going to do now. All right, so we're back on this page and we can close up the agent generator. And you can see that the Windows 7 or Windows Server 2008 target or agent has been added. It's connected back via TCP. And again, it provides us with the ID, the unique ID, the local host or the name of the actual host. In this case, it's Vagrant 2008 R2, and the privilege is user, right? So it's not elevated. That's very, very important. If I click on the process ID here, it gives me information pertaining to this particular agent. Again, it's recommended to categorize your agents into groups based on their the operating system type, either Windows or Linux or Mac OS, or their function. In this case, we'll add this to the Windows group. And again, you can modify the sleep timer here, the watchdog timer. It also provides us with the architecture. So we know it's 64-bit, the process ID, the name of the process, Caldera.exe, where the exe is stored. So when you kill this agent, you can delete Caldera.exe, and that'll pretty much get rid of any artifacts that that may have been created when setting up the agent. As for the executors, it's PowerShell and CMD, and again we just hit save. You can also kill the agent by clicking on kill there, and that'll kill it for you. And we've successfully added our 2 agents. All right, so we've added our agents. What can we do now? What if we want to emulate a particular operation or a particular attack? The next step is to take a look at our operations, right? So we can click on operations here, and it says to start a new operation or review previous ones. You can do that here. So if we click on view or add, the add checkbox, we can create a new operation if we want to. But before we do that, let's take a look at our adversaries, right? So I'll give that a few seconds. It's going to tell you here that adversary profiles are a collection of the MITRE ATT&CK framework TTPs designed to create specific effects on a host or network. Profiles can be used for offensive or defensive use cases. So we can create our own adversary profile if we want to. So we can specify the pre-existing profiles, which again are sorted out based on the TTPs, as it says here, the MITRE ATT&CK framework TTPs. So tactics, techniques, and hold on a second. Let me actually just go back here. I just want to highlight something very, very important that you can actually do here. So let me just open up the MITRE ATT&CK framework page here. There we are. And I'll actually show you that it actually matches this out here. Right, so we have the attack framework opened here. So as I said, if we go back to the adversaries, it's going to provide you with the profiles, the MITRE ATT&CK framework TTPs, which is again tactics, techniques, and profiles. So again, you can actually specify a particular profile here based on its function. So again, for example, if we wanted to, for example, perform some discovery, if you want to actually analyze the ability of the discovery adversary profile, you can click on discovery, and then the abilities are listed out here. All right. So as I mentioned, abilities are essentially just a set of actions that are set to achieve a particular goal or objective on the target system. So in this case, you can see that this discovery profile performs the following abilities, or it actually has the following abilities, right? So in this case, the ability or the profile is discovery, and the abilities are what you would expect with a discovery profile. It identifies the active system user on macOS, Linux, Windows. It also finds local users on Mac and Linux systems. It identifies local users on Mac and Windows systems. It snags the broadcast IP from Mac systems, find users' processes, etc. So this is a good profile to start out if you're performing some discovery, or you want to run some discovery checks to get information or discover information about a particular target, right? So those are your adversary profiles. You can also add a new ability to an adversary profile. However, what I would recommend doing is creating a new adversary profile. So you can provide it with a name here. So for example, we can call this, let's see, we're looking for something like, let's just call it local enumeration, right? So local enumeration, and we say enumerates, we can just say local enumeration for Windows targets, right? Local enumeration for Windows targets. We can add an ability or an adversary here. We can also link an objective. So an objective essentially, I'll get to that in a second because that's beyond this particular scope. But if we click on an ability here, we can specify the MITRE ATT&CK framework tactics. So for example, if we're looking for, let's see, we're looking for discovery, execution, impact, initial access, lateral movement, persistence, technical information gathering. We can choose a technique. We can, for example, say conduct active scanning. It's then going to provide us with the abilities under that particular tactic. But for example, if we say collection, we choose a technique, data from local system. We can also use WMIC on Windows systems. But we can say automated collection, 4 abilities here, automated collection using the command prompt. We can hit enter, and then it's going to bring up the various, I'll get to that in a second. We can see that it generates the ID here. We can search for abilities. So for example, you can search for a particular ability like shares, if we wanted to enumerate shares, right? And of course, you can just get rid of that there, but it will bring up the various abilities associated with that particular search term. So for example, the network shares or view admin shares there, so on and so forth. So let's actually go back to collection here. And I'm just going to reset that. So collection, choose a technique. We're looking for, let's see, automated collection or data from local system. Abilities, we can say find IP address, find files, find company emails. No, that's not interesting. Let's take a look at process discovery. We can discover injectable processes. So again, you get the idea. You can create abilities to do different things on the system, right? And again, we'll get to that in a few minutes, but I want to take you through operations now. So if I click on operations, as I said, operations are essentially, as the word says, operations that you want to run on a particular agent. So I can create a new operation here. I can say, for example, let's say Windows Server 2008, right? R2. So we're just going to call it that. And we'll give it a name based on what we're doing. Let's just say we want to run a discovery operation. We go to basic options. The group we want to specify is the Windows group, which we added the Windows Server agent to. The adversary we're going to use, or the adversary profile, is the discovery profile. We can also use enumerator if we want, but we can click on discovery first. We can keep it on forever. We can then run it immediately if we want. As for the autonomous options, you can run it autonomously or require manual approval for each check. So when Caldera wants to run a check, it'll ask you for approval. You can approve it or reject it, and it'll move on to the next ability. So we can run it autonomously in this case. The cleanup timeout is 30 seconds. That's fine. Cleanup is essentially used when it's used to clean up what was done, or the actual actions that were performed on the target system when this operation has been completed. The great thing here that you can actually do is perform obfuscation of your commands. So you can perform base64 obfuscation, or alternatively Caesar cipher obfuscation and steganography obfuscation. Let's just use plain text obfuscation here. We can set the jitter or the delay. So the minimum and maximum values I'll just set to 10 and 20 seconds respectively there. You can also schedule the runtime for this particular operation. And once the options are set, you just hit start, and that is going to run that particular operation, in this case the discovery adversary profile against the Windows Server 2008 R2 target or R2 agent. Now when it runs, it's going to say running, when it was initiated, the amount of decisions it's performing. You can stop the operation, you can pause it, you can run one step. You can also run operation if you have paused it. You can also switch between autonomous and manual approval. And then it gives you a color-coded legend here based on the actions being performed and whether or not Caldera was successful in performing the action or in running a particular command. So for example, if we take a look at the first action here or decision performed on the target system, which was to identify the active user, you can see that if the star here is highlighted in gold, it means that information was gathered or collected. So you can see the command it ran was username, and it got the username, which was Vagrant. Identify local users. If we click on the star, you can see it tells us resource temporarily unavailable. So that means it wasn't able to get local users. As for find user processes, again using the color-coded legend, you can see that these three have been failures. It's now running the discover domain controller operation here, and again you can tell that that's running because it's not going to provide you with a status yet. But there we are. We can see discover domain controller, that's been run. Has it given us anything? No. Resource temporarily unavailable. And then discover antivirus programs, that's currently running. So it's going to go through all the abilities if I go back into the adversaries, we specified the discovery adversary profile, which was right over here. So it's going to go through all of these abilities until it's completed. You can also, as I said, stop the operation, and that's going to complete it, and then it's going to provide you with a report here that's passed in JSON, which you can then export or create. You can then use to generate. You can then use to parse into other output formats, so on and so forth. I'll get into that, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to wait for this to complete running all, I'm just going to wait for this operation to complete, and then we'll take a look at the information we were able to obtain, and we'll then move on to the next agent, which was the Linux agent. All right, so when this particular operation is complete, it's going to tell you at the bottom here on this ribbon that the abilities have been exhausted. Click the plus icon or the plus symbol for potential links to add new abilities to run in your operation, or click the stop button to finish your operation. Now, you can also run manual commands, and you can obfuscate them with base64 or any other ciphers here. So for example, I can run a manual command on my Windows agent, and I can say, either using PowerShell or the command prompt, I can say maybe, let's see, if I wanted to display the networking status here, or all the adapters or network interfaces, I can run that. And you can see, just give that a few seconds here, the command should actually prompt up here. So again, just give that a few seconds. It's going to be queued, as it says right over here, manual command queued. If for whatever reason the operation seems to have stalled, you can always resume it, or again change the state to running by clicking on the play button here, or by moving or running one step, right? You can do that as well. So again, I'll just wait for that command to be executed, or that manual command to be executed rather. Again, it's important to always take note of the status here to actually know whether the operation is currently running, whether it's in cleanup mode, etc. So again, I'll just wait for that command to be executed. All right, so the manual command was done, and you can see it tells us that that is green, which means it ran successfully, and the gold star means that Caldera was able to gather data, or useful data. You can see that ran the command that I wanted it to run, which provided us with the interfaces, the IP address, the IPv4 address, the subnet mask, default gateway, etc. So you can see how useful this is for red teaming, and in this particular case, adversary emulation. Now, of course, we're simply just running very basic operations here, but if you were to start emulating for example, an APT group's operations, or essentially their attacks, you then, as I said, need to create a new adversary profile and add abilities that that actually match what they did for each particular tactic, and I'll get to that in a second. So once that is done, or once you want to stop it, you can wait for the abilities to be exhausted, or you can just click on stop. And that is going to say changing operation state to cleanup. Cleanup doesn't mean that the operation is finished. It means it's cleaning up its mess, right? The mess of the operation on the target system. So you can see that it says it's finished now. You can download the full report. That is again in JSON format. And you can download the event logs, which is again going to be provided in JSON. And again, once that is done, if I now close that up and head over to operations, that operation can always be accessed here. So for example, you can see I can always access it, download the report, view the information that was gathered, so on and so forth. I can also delete it if I don't want it. And this allows you to switch between running, finished, and other running operations as well. Right, so now that that is done, let's take a look at a use case here, right? So we're just going to take a look at, what if we wanted to take a look at the discovery tactic, or we're actually doing it on Linux, so, privilege escalation techniques, right? Or the privilege escalation tactic here, rather. We can run some of these techniques through the adversary. We can create our own adversary profile for the Linux target or the Linux agent. So we will create a new profile. So we can call it, we can just call it, let's see here. We can just call it Prerequisites check, or just some basic information there. Alternatively, I want to use something that will actually give us enough information regarding what we can do. Maybe persistence is good because the Linux agent, we already have root privileges on it, so we can actually take a look at the persistence. So we can just say Linux persistence. That's the name of the adversary profile. We can provide it a description. So persistence on Linux systems, right? And then we can add an adversary here. So we can choose an already built profile, which in this case, I don't think we have any persistence profiles, or adversary profiles rather, so we can close that. If we add an ability as opposed to an adversary, for example, a tactic here, for example, there we are, persistence, choose a technique, account manipulation, SSH authorized keys, create a local account, create, so on and so forth. And of course, they're going to be sorted based on operating system. And you can get information pertaining to a particular technique by taking a note of the technique ID, which you can then reference on the MITRE ATT&CK framework web page here. So you can search. So for example, let me take you through that here. If we search for T1098, that is the technique 1098. So T1098, we can search for that. For some reason it's searching. Let's actually cancel that search. Let me refresh my page here. Looks like that isn't loading. Let me load that page once again. So MITRE ATT&CK T1098. So we want to type that in again, give it a bit of a few seconds because it's a large database. All right, so as you can see, T1098 is in reference to account manipulation, and then you have the various procedures that follow under that. And again, you can take a look at the one that you want to run, and you have the ID there. So for example, let's take a look at an interesting one that we can do on the Linux system, right? So let's go back into Caldera. So we'll specify account manipulation. Alternatively, we could use any of the other ones, but let's use account manipulation. 3 abilities. We can admin account manipulate. So if we click on that, we can see that that's for the Linux platform. Select an executor. We can specify that we want to use a typical, Bourne shell here. We can also generate a new ID for this particular ability, and we can provide information regarding it. But I recommend leaving it like that. And you can then specify the payload that you want to run. In this case, we can run it with, we can run it with sandcat Linux, and then it gives us the command that we can run. We can add that to the adversary, right? And that's going to add it there. And that's how to add an ability to the, a particular adversary profile that you want to create. Right, so, and you can see it also tells you right over here under the icons that when it actually provides you with the operating system icons to tell you that it works on that operating system. It also tells you whether it uses a payload and whether or not it cleans up after itself. And you can do that as well. So I can just get rid of that. And again, I just wanted to highlight that process. So let's run a new operation against the Linux system. And we'll specify, we'll create a new one. So we'll just say Linux agent. And we will say we're looking for the Linux group. The adversary we're going to look for is, how about thief, right? The thief adversary profile. You can get more about, you can learn more about the abilities of an adversary profile by clicking on adversaries and then clicking on the profile that you want to use, in this case thief, and it tells you what it does. So for example, in this case, it will create a staging directory. This is pertaining to exfiltration, the exfiltration tactic. It finds files, interesting files, stages sensitive files, compresses the stage directory, and then exfiltrates the data. right? So you can learn more about the profile. So let's see which one is interesting here that we can use, because primarily, again, I'm not really, modeling my operations based on a particular APT group. But if we say terminal, let's see what that does. That simply sets up command and control for us. Enumerator, that's to do with Windows primarily. Collection, check, service creation, lateral movement. Let's see, super spy, that's probably again used for what's it called, surveillance on your targets. So again, if this is an employee system, you can set you can use this particular adversary profile, and this again will capture the screen, copy the clipboard, get Chrome bookmarks, record the microphone on Mac, create a staging directory, find, stage the sensitive files, compress, exfiltrate the data, discover antivirus programs installed, scan for Wi-Fi networks, discover the preferred Wi-Fi network, sniff network traffic, and add the bookmark, right? So this is quite a useful profile here. But I was interested in another one that I used the previous time that I actually wanted to highlight here. I just can't seem to find it. I don't want to use the Windows worm. That's quite dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Service creation, lateral movement. I want to run one on Linux. So we can pretty much create our own profile, but I didn't want to do that just yet. Right. Yeah, so let's actually create our own adversary profile before we run the operation, because this is not doing what I want. So I'll just bring up the operations page and the adversaries page here, and give that a few seconds. It should bring it up. There we are. We can then create a new one. We'll provide it with a name. We'll just call it Linux for right now. We can also link an objective here. So you can specify the default objective. We'll get to objectives in a second. Add an ability, choose a tactic. Again, let's just say we want persistence again. Choose a technique here. We're looking for Linux persistence. So account manipulation, additional. Let's see, create a Linux there, create a new user in Linux with the root user ID and group ID. So that'll create a new admin user. And again, we can then specify the payload here, which in this case we'll use Sandcat. So let me find Sandcat Go Linux. That's the payload. And then the platform executor is Bourne Shell. The command that will execute is provided here. And it provides you with the name of the implant, which in this case is better with butter. And the user, the cleanup command is provided here. Now, of course, this is only going to work once we've elevated our privileges. So this is very important. And of course, on the Linux system, we've already elevated our privileges. So we can save and then add to adversary. And then we can say Linux add new admin user, or Linux let's just call it add admin or sudo user, right? And we'll just say adds admin user account as the description. And then we can save it, right? So again, just make sure that when you're specifying the options here, you can modify or add more information. You can upload your own payload, add an executor, or generate your own ID. But in this case, everything looks fine. So I'm just going to hit save, and that's going to create the adversary profile for us. So now under operations, we can create a new operation. We'll just call it Linux persistence. Right, and I'll rename that correctly. Basic options, we'll use the Linux group because that contains the Linux server. And we'll look for the profile, the adversary profile we created, which is add sudo user. Keep open forever, run immediately. As for autonomy, we can run it autonomously. And the timeout, 30 seconds is fine. For the stealth, we can base64 encode that, but I don't need to do that. And I'll just hit start. Right, and that's going to start the operation. And it's going to create the new user in Linux with the root user ID and GID. So again, it's running. It provides us with the date. And again, you want to give that a few seconds based on the timing options that you specified. And again, based on the output, we should be able to tell whether it was successful in doing it. And then we can confirm it on the Linux agent and see whether it actually created the user. All right, so I just navigated back to my home menu, and I just want to tell you that you can still navigate around Caldera and your operations will still be running in the background. So if I go back to operations, I can specify a list of my operations that I've run previously, and Linux persistence is still running. And look at that, we get a green circle here, which means that was successful. If we click on the star here, it doesn't give us output primarily because the user should be added, and Linux by default doesn't provide us with output when we run the user add command. But we can see that the user butter has been added and the password is butter. So now we've been able to establish a some persistence on the target system. So we can actually verify that that is the case if we head over into our Caldera agent 1. And what I'll do is I'll say cat etc password. There we are, and the user butter has been added. There we are. And if we say groups butter, you can see that butter is part of the root group and has admin privileges as a result. If we list out the processes here, you can see that the process here for the Caldera agent, or the reverse shell, you can see it says it uses the binary Caldera and then the flag server, and then connects back here. And again, as I said, the implant name should be something that's very difficult to identify for a system administrator. But again, I ran the agent from this directory. These are the files here that should be cleaned up whenever I kill the agent. And these are essentially the only artifacts that are created whenever you set up an agent. So you don't have to worry about artifacts being stored or anything like that. But going back to Caldera, we can stop the operation. And it's now going to change the state to cleanup. So again, just wait for that to clean up. We can see that it's actually completed. And there we are, that's done. So we can now download the report, etc., download the event log, so on and so forth. And again, that's essentially how to create your own custom adversary profile and run it as an operation against a specific agent. Now, as I said, it's going to be, the operations you run are going to be based on what you're trying to do, or what type of organization you're trying to test, what type of APT group you're trying to emulate. Right, so for example, again, if I click on, let's see, initial access, phishing, we can click on that. We can look for, and we'll be taking a look at this during our exploitation video, where we'll be taking a look at phishing and how certain APT groups or various hacking groups, utilize phishing campaigns. So for example, the Dragonfly spear phishing campaign, it gives you information as to the techniques that were used, so on and so forth, etc. Right, so again, if you wanted to emulate a tactic by a particular APT group, for example, let's see, APT18, right? Let's use these guys, right? That's operated since at least 2009 and has targeted the following industries, right? If we take a look at the techniques they've used, file and directory discovery being one tactic that they've used, we can see that they've used 3-para-rat, a few other rats, and let's see, procedure examples. We can click on one of these procedures that looks interesting. You can see they're fairly simple commands that they've run on target accounts or target systems, like bin password on exploited victims, perhaps to run architecture and related information. So that's enumeration that they're doing there. If we click on that particular ID, well, hold on, let me just go back there 1 second. There we are. We were looking at file and directory discovery, but APT18. There we are, can list for files and specific directories. There we are. So these are the commands or the procedures that they used. So let's see what one that we can try and replicate, or one that makes sense. So for example, ingress tool transfer, obfuscate files or information using, obfuscate the payload itself, collect system information from the target system. Let's click on that. That is defined by, just discovery, I believe. This system information, let's see if we can identify it here. There we are. So that is under the discovery tactic. So if we wanted to replicate this, we could say, we could create a new adversary profile. and give that a few seconds to start up. There we are. So I can create a new profile. We'll just call it System Information Discovery. System Information Discovery, discovery there. And we can add an adversary, so the discovery profile, add to adversary, and then we're looking for system info, information discovery, and then we have the procedure examples here, or of how this was used. So we can click on, for example, system info discovery, which should be an ability, but if it doesn't exist here, we can get rid of all of these. So, we can just get rid of all of them here and leave the ones that you're interested in terms of abilities. But we can then add our own ability manually if they don't exist within the pre-built profile. So we can add an ability, discovery, sorry, not execution, discovery, choose a technique, system information discovery, this system information discovery, yeah, that was the name there. So system, let me see if we can find it here, system information discovery. I can't seem to find it here. There we are, system information discovery, the ability. So again, it gives us the various abilities here that we can use. So for example, system information discovery, where we can run this on the Windows on the Windows system or the Windows platform, and the executor, we can leave it as CMD. I would typically recommend using PowerShell. We'll use sandcat. Sorry, we actually want to run this on Windows. So sandcat go Windows. You can enter the cleanup command if one exists. So this will list out system info, and it'll query, make a registry query and display a list of services, right? This is, yeah, system information discovery. And then we can hit save and add to adversary. And this is system information discovery. And we can just say Windows system information discovery and hit save. We've created another adversary profile. We can now run the operation against the Windows target or the Windows agent. So we can create a new one. System info, specify the Windows group. Adversary is system info, Windows system information discovery. We'll leave it as is. We can also, try and use base64 obfuscation. I'll change the jitter to minimum of 10 seconds, maximum of 20 seconds. And I can specify a schedule. I don't want to do that. I'll hit start, and that will run the operation against, well, that's not running. Did I actually run it correctly? For some reason, I don't think it ran that correctly. Let me try and refresh that. Probably need to re-add it. All right, so again, my Caldera instance seemed to have had a bit of a slowdown. As I said, it's really important that you run it with the recommended hardware specifications. But in any case, the operation is running against our Windows Server 2008 system. So system information discovery, using the adversary profile we created. Right, so I'm just going to, again, wait for this to complete. All right, so it looked like that particular ability failed, and that's perfectly fine. As I said, that's why we're doing this. But we can try and enumerate this manually. So within the same operation, we can say manual command, choose an agent, Vagrant, Windows Server 2008, and we can just simply say system info. Let's see if it's able to do that, right? So we can run that command, manual command queued. Again, just make sure that it's running. There we are, manual command. And again, wait for it to complete running the command, and let's see whether that enumerates any useful information. So you can always run your own commands. In this case, you can see, again, it tells us resource temporarily unavailable. That's probably, that probably has something to do with the fact that we're running this on an unprivileged user account, or we actually have access to the target, or the agent rather is unprivileged. You can also add, potential links. So for example, add an agent. It's going to build any potential links that you may have. So for example, if we click on, based on the target architecture and operating system, we can say, for example, let's see, privilege escalation. Let's try that out, right? So bypass user access control. Let's see if it can actually do that. DLL hijacking. Let's see if we can actually elevate our privileges by running one of these techniques manually. We can add all of them if we want. So we can add, and let's see if that enumerates anything for us. So it's going to run all of these techniques. You can see that DLL hijacking failed, bypassing the registry. Let's see if that works. And then bypassing user access control, medium, and then file handler hijack. So again, let all of these abilities run. And again, we'll get to the little message here in a second. And we can see that UAC bypass registry, it looks like that works. And again, if we head over to our agents, let's take a look at our agents there. We can see we have that there. We can then again try and enumerate information from the target regarding the, or we can learn more about that particular technique. So for example, if we click on this here, we can see that new item property path, it essentially bypasses using the registry. dword value is set to 0 force, and then we can see that the process child name is system, and process provider, and you can essentially use that information to stage your privilege escalation attack. But you can actually see that this does work, and you can use links to find potential abilities for your particular target. So for example, credential access, we can see credential dumping from memory. How about NTLM hash dumping? Credential access, credential theft with mimikatz, that might work. We don't want to perform password mining manually. Let's try that particular ability there. Credential dumping, RDP credentials. We don't have RDP on the server, so that's not going to be useful. Using LSAS memory, I don't think we'll have any credentials stored in memory. I'm not too sure about that, but let's see whether this was able to run successfully first. So you can see offline credential theft with mimikatz, that did not work at all. Yeah, so that didn't work at all. Let's try another one. Again, credential access. We can try and let's choose the agent here firstly. Credential access, dumping credentials from memory. LSA secrets usually works. This is from the SAM database. Dump secrets from the Windows registry. Let's see if that works. Dumping LSA secrets. Password cracking, credentials in files, credentials in registry. Golden ticket. No, that'll not work. We're not dealing with Active Directory here, although that could be very interesting. Let's take a look at some of the other techniques. RDP, we might as well try that, although I'm pretty sure we don't have an RDP running. OS credential dumping, credential access, credential dumping with NPP spy. I don't think that will work, but let's see whether the abilities we've executed here actually worked. Yeah, we can see that they don't work. We can also, again, we can try and run these commands manually. But of course they're being run in the PowerShell, which I guess it makes sense that it's telling us we can't run any interesting or any elevated commands that way. But again, you can actually see how you can build links based on your target architecture or operating system, and actually perform or run the abilities that you want without creating your own adversary profile. So I'm just going to stop that, and we'll give that a few seconds to clean up. So to clean up all the files that it transferred over to the target system. So, mimikatz, all of that stuff is cleaned up, and that's finished. All right, excellent. So now we can, in terms of reporting, as I conclude this particular video, because we've been going on for quite a while now, as I conclude this video, in terms of the reports, you can download the JSON reports, or alternatively, if we take a look at the plugins, we can explore the debrief plugin, right? So the debrief plugin provides you with campaign analytics, right? So select the operations below, and so for example, if you click on this operation, which was the system information operation, you can see that it gives you a graph here that's really not well structured at this point here. But we have our C2 server here, which is the Caldera server, and we then have the Windows Server 2008 target, and we then have the command or the actual tactic used, and then we have the various abilities here that were performed, and then the green ones are highlighted as successful. So if we click on that, or you can actually utilize the play button to actually demonstrate the actual flow here. So again, you can see it ran this particular ability first, so on and so forth. I can then pause it. I can also display the techniques that were used. So again, these are all the techniques that were performed here, and we can then play it so from the first one to the last one. So we can see system information, auto-generated abuse, elevation, control mechanism, bypass user access control, so on and so forth. And there are multiple views here. You also have stats, right? So stats essentially provide you with when it was started, finished, etc., and your agents, the steps that were performed, and the tactics and techniques that were utilized. And you can also download the PDF report here. So for the graph options, you can also show steps as tactics. I actually recommend doing that. For the report options, the enabled sections are pretty much all of them. And then you can use a custom logo and download the report, the PDF report there. So if I open this up with Firefox, it's a really great report that it generates for you. So there we are, the statistics, the agents, the operations graph, and again, you need to set that up correctly. The attack path graph, and then of course the fact and the tactics and techniques that were utilized. There we are. Steps in operations debrief, their status. So if it was successful, there we are. You can see that ran successfully there. Then the name is provided there. And we also had another one, I believe, here that was successful. Not just, there we are. That was UAC bypass through the Windows registry. And yeah, so the report generation is fantastic. It gives you a very, very well documented report based on your findings from the operations. And as I said, this was just a simple demonstration through some operations. Another plugin that I wanted to highlight was the game board plugin, which is used for red team versus blue team competitions, or if you're trying to assess the competence or the ability of the blue team to detect attacks and mitigate them. So for example, if I specify the red team operation here, you can see that the blue team did not defend any of these attacks. Now you can also deploy blue team agents on the same hosts to actually see whether they can block particular attacks or block particular operations and abilities. And the ideal way of doing that would be to then generate your own commands, encode them, and then test and see whether the blue team agent can defend this. But again, if there is a blue team that's monitoring all of this through a SIEM system, or the blue team has an SOC center and they're monitoring all the logs, they should be able to identify or log these particular operations, and then of course detect them and mitigate or block them, right? So again, as I said, the objective of this video is not to focus on the blue team but the red team. The other plugins that are useful here is the training plugin, which again will take you through a certificate training path that actually teaches you the process or goes through the process of deploying agents, adversaries, running operations, running the mock plugin, which can be used to create mock user agents if you want to run various attacks on them. And then the response aspect is the blue team aspect. So that's also another great plugin. As for the fact sources essentially allow you to specify the so again, I'll just explain what it is really quickly. So facts are identifiable pieces of data collected by agents or loaded when the server starts. A source is a collection of facts. Rules are boundaries to ensure that specific traits cannot be used. So you can create a new fact source based on the type of information that you want them to store. and you can specify that particular fact source when you're running an operation. In this case, we've pretty much used Alice filters, or we can specify the existing source, which in this case we can use the system information source there, and for example, the basic source essentially displays the information pertinent to the rules there. So you can list out the rules there, and that is sources. Now, objectives, right over here. Objectives are groups of goals that have that an adversary will accomplish. So you can create a new objective for the adversary to accomplish. So you can provide an objective name, and then specify the target, the operator, the value, and the count. So for example, if I add a new row here, you can specify the target, the operator, etc., etc. You can also use the default one, which again is the target is set to exhaustion is equal to complete, and the count is set there. So that again is used for objectives, for the complete objective for operations. Right. You also have planners, which is very useful. So planner is a module which contains logic for how a running operation should make decisions about what abilities to use and in what order. So you can either go about this through the batch planner, the buckets planner, or the atomic planner, which is great, right? So that's what we've been using. The atomic planner, as it says here, during each phase of the operation, the atomic planner iterates through each agent and sends the next available ability it thinks that the agent can complete based on a variety of factors. The decision is based on the agent matching the operating system. So if it matches, it'll execute the next match of the ability and the ability command having no unsatisfied variables. The planner then waits for each agent to complete its command before determining the subsequent abilities. So you can use various planners. The batch planner, again, as it says right over here, loops through all agents which are part of the operations group and sends each of them a list of ability commands and that the planner thinks it can complete. The decision is based on the agent matching the operating system, execution platform, so on and so forth. So this is pretty much what I wanted to cover. You can also take a look at your obfuscators that it comes with. So you have plain text, base64, we've explored that. And your configuration, which I've already talked about. You can configure your Caldera server here and enable plugins manually. If you want to learn more about the various plugins and what they do, you can take a look at the documentation on the GitHub repository here. It actually explains what each plugin does and how it can be used to facilitate more advanced operations. Right, so now that we've taken a look at how to use a Caldera for adversary emulation, we can now move on to the next set of videos, which will cover the tactics and techniques used in red teaming, and we'll start off with reconnaissance and then exploitation, privilege escalation, persistence, so on and so forth. So that's going to be it for this video, and I'll be seeing you in the next video.